Right, for some analysis on the midterm budget policy statement, I'm now joined via Zoom by Development Economist from Stellenbosch Business School, Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko. Thanks so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the programme. The last time we spoke, we were looking at the economic recovery plan. And today, I guess we got a sense of where those numbers are going to come from to make that plan happen. But let's begin with your overall impression about what the Finance Minister said today. Were you overwhelmed, underwhelmed, or indifferent?
Let me start with a positive, Peter, and say that I'm very surprised and actually quite pleased that there's mention of domestic surpluses from the capital markets, particularly our pension funds that will be used. So I think from that perspective, there is some innovation creeping in. The detail, however, was not provided. I think overall, overarching the medium-term budget policy statement, we are clear now that Treasury has given up on a long-term growth path that targets what the National Development Plan had targeted of 6% growth in the next decade. They now have revised it downwards themselves to 3% average, and then 1.5, 1.7 in the outer years, in the next 2 years, 2 to 3 years. And this speaks to the low growth trap. And I think I'm very concerned that we have accepted a mediocre, less than Sub-Saharan Africa is growing at an average 6 to 8%, particularly East and Western African counterparts, Ivory Coast, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Sudan. Everyone is growing at 6%, except South Africa. Why are we not able to deal with the structural problems that lead to 1% growth rate? The contraction of 7.2% is a continuation of the pre-COVID situation where we had 2 technical recessions and contractions that had nothing to do with COVID, but really we were on a downward trajectory of our own doing because of our own economic policies and economic woes. So I must say, definitely we can do a lot better. Do I believe we will do better? I think we must put pressure, continue engaging, continue offering alternatives, inputting into the plans and proposals, and perhaps we'll see a change. We've seen the outward surplus target moving from the 3-year to 5-year plan. You must remember the fiscal consolidation in the previous budgets was going to be implemented immediately in the next 3 years. There was a surplus target. That received a lot of backlash. All economists from both left and right in terms of economic ideology all agree that fiscal stimulus in a time of crisis is an imperative. And I think the minister may have heard that out, but the austerity seems to be on a continuation. So he's just elongated the time frame within which he'll implement to 5 years. But it looks like we're still on a downward trajectory in terms of really stimulating the economy and targeting real growth that is over 6% GDP.
All right. A lot of what we've been talking about is quite strategic and it's forward-looking. But, you know, most of us work on a month-to-month basis. Our budgets don't go to 4, 5, 6 months. What does Treasury, what does South Africa need to do next month on the 1st of November?
So Treasury, what they've put in place is really, they are doing downward revisions, continuing from the supplementary budget. So we've seen over 100 billion of downward revisions. The fiscal, what they call the reprioritization, and the non-interest expenditure. The real increase in non-interest expenditure is about 36 billion. So out of that 500 billion fiscus, we're seeing that non-interest expenditure. The increment that will come to your pocket is the increase in the COVID grant or the social relief from COVID-19 and the temporary employment relief scheme. And we know that the 200 billion government guarantee loan scheme that is being targeted for SMMEs has not been taken up by more than 16 billion. And the targeted projection, by the way, Peter, is a 21 billion increase, up to 21 billion in January. The private sector is just not coming to the party. Whether there's non-recourse loans, 100% government guarantee, is the same companies that are getting the benefit from the private sector. So it looks like they're a bit hamstrung with ideas. So when it looks at household income impact, it is really very little room to maneuver for the basic, for people who are looking at new recovery and getting more income into their pockets. Because economic activity, there's very little speaking about how the infrastructure spend is going to be localized. how the infrastructure spend will be aggregated away from oligopolies, away from the big five, but to include across the provinces, across the strategic spatial divide of all of South Africa, to ensure that all pockets of our economy make all the gains. And we're not hearing enough of that, because if that 100 billion of infrastructure goes to the same companies that it got to before 2020, in terms of the recession, we're not going to see a change in the economic trajectory, except to create short-term jobs that are not sustainable, that lead us to the 10.8 million unemployed South Africans and the high level of inequality. So I must be honest, it does not look very positive, but I think we can do things differently, and I'll always hunt that.
All right, we can do things differently, but it seems like we keep flogging a dead horse with things like SAA. 10 billion.
So the SAA discussion is an interesting one because I have a slightly different view. SAA is a strategic asset. Denel is a strategic asset. I don't only want to talk to SAA. Land Bank is a strategic asset. What has happened in the last 2 decades is that we've been able to strip those strategic assets to literally deterioration because of bad management, poor governance, and bad cost recovery models. SAA generates more than 26 billion if you look at their financial statements per annum. The expenditure, if you look at their expenditure just on the financials, is at 31 billion on average. You can just look at it year on year. This means that the cost of fuel, the cost of employees, and their line items in terms of expenditure are costing them more than what they incur in terms of revenue. So SAA generates hundreds of millions because of the routes, and it's a lucrative business, but because of bad management, because of contracts that it's not able to get out of, contracts that cost more than they should, by the way. And I think these business rescue practitioners, the new plan, and the ability to get SAA out of the quagmire that it's in should enable us, I believe, with allowing the board and management to run independently without political interference.
So let me ask you this then. Why then did the British government sell off British Airways? The Dutch government sell off KLM? The French government sell off Air France? Germans sell off Lufthansa? If these first world countries say we don't need a national airline, who are we to say that we must keep one?
So I love your question. Who are we as an African country, a country in sub-Saharan Africa, a country that is in need of a national carrier, a country that has significant level of unemployment, but also why is a national carrier needed in an economy? One, the logistics counterpart, the logistics need of SAA in the event that the country actually has a serious national crisis like something like the pandemic comes about. We are not in the same position, and we do not have necessarily the footprint that the German airlines and the competitors in Germany would have vis-a-vis what South Africa has. The second point I would say is that because of the history of South Africa, the role of SOEs is not the same as a first world economy. So we cannot compare ourselves primarily to OECD economies until we deal with the underdevelopment in South Africa. So until we deal with the issue of the differences in the 90% of the wealth in the concentrated 10%, we must deal strategically with that and use the state assets to deal with the unequal distribution of wealth, the unequal distribution of access to factors of production. That's why state-owned enterprises are key. So because we have bust ours or misused ours, let's deal with the thieves, let's deal with those who have usurped rent from these SOEs who are in contracts that are overpriced, but let's not deteriorate the SOEs because of mismanagement and malpractice. If you look at newly industrialized countries, which you haven't mentioned, Peter, you just mentioned OECD economies, they have the very same multinationals coming from SOEs that they were able to use very strategically to grow key subsectors of the economy. And these are Lenovo, Samsung, Korea Electronics, LG. All of these were bolstered and created through the subsidization of the state, through making sure that the industrial complex enables the formation of these key assets and national champions. And I believe SAA is equivalent to a national champion in its own sense, but we've deteriorated it because of bad governance and political interference, and we must therefore deal decisively with that. But do we throw the water out with the baby, the bathwater out with the baby? I don't agree. I think that let's deal with the governance issues, those that have taken monies unnecessarily and thieved, deal with that, but let's keep the SOE and keep it running and not destroy it because of historical failures.
Dr. Nthabiseng Moleko, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed. Let's hope that the taxpayers see things the same way as you and have the patience to keep on pouring their hard-earned cash into this asset. Thanks so much indeed for your time.